I think it's safe to say that we moved out of the realm of conspiracy theory and into the realm of conspiracy fact, with the thought that the powers that be don't really want us eating real food anymore, as evidenced by this thing, this pack of flavorless noodles and salt and chicken flavor in here, meant to be as cheap as possible and not really provide more calories than it should for the amount of nutrition that it gives you. And I don't know. I've eaten a lot of ramen noodles in my day, but I'm kind of at the point now where if you can eat this, if you can afford this, you can afford to make noodles. They're pretty cheap. There's a reason why they're a staple food in Italy and all over the world. And you don't need fancy devices. All you need is like a rolling pin, a knife, some eggs, some flour, some salt, whatever. Some place to roll it. That's it. And so today, throwing this in the trash and going with noodles. Let's go.
I'm going to start with egg noodles because in my opinion they're the least amount of bullshit for the best results. Start with 4 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon of salt on a workable surface. Make a well in the dry mix and pour 6 beaten eggs and 2 tablespoons of water into it. Incorporate with a wooden spoon or your hands until a soft dough forms. Knead the dough until it's smooth, about 10 minutes. If it looks like I'm having trouble working the dough, it's because I am. The bunker is not insulated and it is very cold out. Nevertheless, I persevere. Once you have a smooth dough, divide it into 4 parts. For each part, roll it out as thin as you can, or as thin as you want. Note that the noodles will puff up when you boil them, so roll them thinner than you think you want them. Take the dough sheet, flour it well, and roll it into a tube. Then, with a sharp knife, cut the dough into strips. Unroll the dough and voila, pasta. Alternatively, you can also use a pizza cutter to cut noodles, but it's a little more effort. Next up is probably the most complicated noodle that I made, and that's ramen noodles. Unlike egg noodles that can be measured out by volume, ramen noodles need to be measured out by weight. They also require some specialty ingredients that most people might not have. And, as we'll see, they also basically necessitate a pasta roller, which I do not have. So this will be an experience all around. Start by adding 4 grams of salt and 6 grams of sodium carbonate to 160 milliliters of water and stir until it's dissolved. You can find sodium carbonate in an Asian grocery store, or you can do what I did and make your own by baking sodium bicarbonate, otherwise known as baking soda, in an oven at 350 degrees until it loses 1/3 of its weight in CO2. The resulting sodium carbonate will store well in an airtight container, so I made about half a box worth for later use. Side note, sodium carbonate is kind of caustic, so don't touch the powder directly with your bare hands. Once you've dissolved the salts, mix 396 grams of bread flour with 4 grams of wheat gluten in a food processor. Bread flour has a higher protein content than all-purpose flour, and that, combined with the added gluten, helps create the chewy texture of the noodle. Add the water solution, a third at a time, to the flour until it's all absorbed. Once all the water is added, pulse the mixture until it has a pebbly texture, and then let the dough rest for about half an hour before proceeding to let the flour absorb the water. Once it's rested, pack the dough into a ball and divide into 2 halves. This is the point that you would run the dough through progressively narrower rollers on your pasta roller to work the gluten into a nice chain structure, but when that's not an option, you'll just have to muscle through. Roll the dough as thin as you can, flour it, fold it in half, roll it flat again, flour and fold it in half again, and then roll it flat one more time. This is the best I can do. Unfold the dough, which should be semi-easy if you flour the dough between rollings, and cut the noodles in the same way that I cut the egg noodles. I wanted extra thin ramen noodles, so I started using a cutting mat as a guide for the pizza cutter, and that worked pretty well. Form the noodles into nests, and either let them rest for 24 hours to develop their texture, or do what I did and dry them immediately. Lastly, I'm going to make rice noodles, which are different from the other two in that they have to be cooked. Start by combining 1 1/4 cups rice flour, 2 tablespoons cornstarch, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 1/4 cup water in a bowl. I did not have rice flour on hand, so I had to make some by powdering rice in a blender and then sifting out the large chunks, which worked well enough for my purpose. To this mixture, add 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil, stir to combine, and then let the mixture sit for half an hour. Meanwhile, bring a large pan of water to a boil. The pan must be large enough that a smaller, flat-bottomed pan must float inside it and have enough room to be covered by a lid. The idea is that you'll put about a 1/4 cup of rice batter into the small pan that has been sufficiently oiled, and cook it for 5 to 10 minutes over the boiling water. Thinner pans will take less time to cook, but I used Pyrex, which will take closer to 10 minutes. Once the batter is cooked completely, remove the first pan and drop in a second pan. While the second pan is cooking, remove the first sheet and allow this to cool. Repeat this process until you run out of batter. From here, the noodles can be eaten fresh or dehydrated for later use, so I'm going to split them and dehydrate the half that is the correct thickness, and eat the batch that I tried to make extra thick right now with some fresh onion and garlic, soy sauce, rice vinegar, sesame oil, pepper flakes, and sesame seeds. Wow, that's better than I thought it would be.
So that's it for noodles. Not particularly complicated, not particularly time intensive, a little bit of labor intensive, but the effort is worth it if you make fresh noodles on your own, especially egg noodles. Like I said before, not that much effort for a fairly good, very good product. Although I will say, I dried all of the noodles that I made, the ramen noodles, the egg noodles, and the rice noodles. The only one that dried very well were the rice noodles. The other two, I don't know if I dried them too long or what, but they ended up getting kind of crumbly. That being said, if you're making fresh noodles, just eat the fresh noodles. Like, just boil them right then. The exception to the ramen noodles. You want to let those rest so they get all chewy, but I've got a 5-gallon bucket of macaroni if I want that. If I want fresh noodles, should have done that. But I wanted to use them in future videos. I wanted to see how long they would keep, and now I know. That being said, I have flour all the time, I have eggs all the time, I have salt all the time, and I have water all the time. So whenever I want noodles, fresh, spaghetti, carbonara, whatever, I'm here for it. So, anyway, I'll see you next week. Conspiracy Cookout.